What if the signature meant to save your life became the reason your heart was never the same again? The rain had been falling for hours, thick and relentless, carving silver rivers down the glass walls of the old city station. Every strike of thunder seemed to echo her heartbeat. Elena pressed the pen to the paper, her hand trembling, her reflection fractured in the small pool of water on the table. The contract was simple: sign, leave everything behind, and start over. But simple things have a way of hiding the deepest traps. The man across from her didn't blink as she signed. His black suit looked like it had been tailored by shadows themselves. His voice low, almost tender when he said, "You'll be safe now." Safety. That was the promise. The word tasted like relief and regret all at once. 2 weeks earlier, safety hadn't even been a thought in Elena's mind. She was a pianist, brilliant, unknown, and quietly drowning in debt after her father's death. The city she lived in, Mervale, thrived on art and lies in equal measure. Every street sang with the hum of ambition. But behind each gallery door lurked someone ready to trade souls for success. Elena had refused to play that game until the night she saw the envelope. It was resting on her piano, sealed with a crimson wax stamp she didn't recognize. Inside, a single line was written in black ink: "Sign, and no one will ever find you." No sender, no explanation, just that sentence. That same night she noticed the car outside her window, a black sedan parked too long under the flickering streetlight. She told herself it was coincidence, but when she caught the faint glint of a camera lens behind the windshield, her blood turned to ice. She packed a small suitcase, grabbed her father's watch, and didn't look back. The next morning, she followed the instructions written on a second envelope left at her door: a train ticket, a time, and a place, the old station that hadn't seen travelers in a decade. That's where she met him, Lucien. He introduced himself as a representative of the Lumen Agency, an organization that helped artists disappear from dangerous situations, whether financial, political, or personal. He said they gave new names, new faces, new lives, but there was something else in the way he spoke, a certain gravity, as if he wasn't merely offering escape, but ownership still. Fear leaves little room for doubt. So Elena signed. The world she woke up to was unrecognizable. Her name was now Elise Moreau. Her new home, a quiet villa on the outskirts of a small coastal town in the south. The sea was close enough to hear through the windows, a low, eternal whisper. Everything was provided for her: a piano, a new identity card, even a letter of introduction to the town's music academy. And he appeared often in the weeks that followed, always unannounced. Sometimes to check on her progress, sometimes to deliver documents. But his visits never felt official. There was always a silence before he left, a lingering pause, like he wanted to say something he wasn't allowed to. One evening, as the sun fell over the sea, Elena asked him the question that had been burning in her chest. "Who were they?" she whispered. "The ones you saved me from." Lucien's eyes softened. "You don't want to know," he said. Then, more quietly, "And I can't tell you." But in the days that followed, the dreams began. In them, Elena saw flashes of her old life, but altered. Faces she didn't recognize standing in her father's study. A woman in a red coat watching her from the end of a hallway. A voice, low and familiar, saying, "You signed it, so now it binds you." Each morning she woke with the echo of that voice still in her ears. Lucien started appearing less frequently. When he did come, he looked different, more distant. The softness in him had been replaced by something heavier, almost mournful. One night, while walking along the cliffs, she found him there alone, staring at the horizon. The wind pulled at his coat as the last light of day bled into the sea. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. He didn't turn to her. "We don't get to leave, Elise. Not once the ink has dried." There was a pause. The kind that holds entire truths between two heartbeats. "Then why help me?" she said. Finally, he looked at her. His eyes were pale gray, like the surface of a storm. "Because you remind me of someone I couldn't save." He walked away before she could ask who. Days turned into weeks, and the town began to whisper about the mysterious pianist in the villa by the sea. People said she played as if her music carried secrets, but one man seemed to listen differently, at a young photographer who lived above the bakery. He had a quiet gentleness that contrasted sharply with Lucien's restrained formality. When he smiled, she felt warmth for the first time since the night she ran. They began meeting often, at first by chance, then by choice. He'd bring her flowers, or sit in the corner while she practiced, capturing her on film in moments she didn't realize she was alive again. But the more her heart leaned toward him, the stranger her world became. Letters began appearing in her piano bench, written in that same black ink. "Remember what you signed." Her reflection started to flicker in mirrors her face. One moment, another woman's the next. A red coat appeared at the edge of her dreams, closer each night, and Lucien's visits stopped entirely. One evening Etienne came to her door, pale and breathless. "There's a man in town asking about you," he said. He showed a photograph of a woman who looks exactly like you but with a different name. Elena's pulse thundered. She asked to see the photograph. It was her face, her old name, the one she was supposed to have left behind. That night, she went to Lucien's villa, miles down the coast. The door was locked, the windows dark. But on his desk, she found an open file, her file. Inside were documents, photographs, and a letter addressed to her in Lucien's handwriting. "Elise," it began. "If you are reading this, then you've already broken the first rule. You were never meant to be found. But they know, they always know. I tried to keep you hidden, but the contract is binding for both of us. Run if you must, but do not trust the man who smiles easily. He is not who he says he is." The letter was unsigned. Elena's world tilted. Etienne, the man who had brought warmth into her life, was the one she was warned about. But why? And what did Lucien mean by binding for both of us? The next morning, she confronted Etienne. He seemed hurt by her suspicion at first, but when she mentioned the letter, something changed in his eyes. "You think I'd hurt you," he said quietly. "Elise, you don't even know who you really are." He reached into his jacket and handed her an old photograph. It showed her father, young, smiling, and standing beside him was Lucien, the same Lucien who had saved her. The truth was unraveling too quickly for her to breathe. Etienne took a step closer. "He didn't rescue you," he said. "He erased you. You were never supposed to remember." Thunder rolled again, just like the night she'd signed her name. Her knees went weak. The sea outside roared as if it too was remembering something long buried. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I was part of it," he said. "Until I fell in love with you." The air went still, the kind of stillness that only comes before something breaks. In that silence, she felt the truth pressing at the edges of her mind, something terrible and tender all at once. The contract, the escape, the dreams. None of it had been what she thought. And as Etienne's words echoed, "I fell in love with you," Elena realized that maybe, somewhere between danger and desire, she had fallen for the very person she was meant to run from. The clock on the wall ticked once. Then again, she turned toward the window, where the reflection of a red coat stood just behind her shoulder. Outside, the sea began to rise. The pen she'd once used to sign her escape lay on the piano, its tip glistening faintly as if waiting for another signature. And in that moment, Elena understood the story wasn't over. Not even close, because what she had signed wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something that wanted her back. The sea was no longer calm that night. Waves crashed against the cliffside like fists of glass, and the wind howled through the shutters of the villa as if the ocean itself were trying to speak her name. Elena stood frozen before the window, her reflection split between two worlds, hers and the shadowed figure in the red coat standing just behind her. But when she turned, the room was empty. Only the faint scent of salt and roses lingered in the air, and the sound of Etienne's voice, low and trembling. "Elise, listen to me. We don't have much time." She stepped back from the glass, eyes wide. "You said you were part of it," she whispered. "Part of what?" He hesitated. Outside, lightning tore the horizon apart for a moment, illuminating his face, the guilt in it, the exhaustion of someone who had been running far too long. "The Lumen Agency," he said finally. "It isn't what Lucien told you it was. It doesn't protect people, it trades them." Her heart faltered. "Trades them in exchange for their disappearance," Etienne said, his words measured but heavy. "The agency keeps something, memories, identities, sometimes lives. People sign away more than they realize. You thought you were escaping danger, but you were only stepping into another form of it." Elena felt the room shrink, and Etienne exhaled slowly. Lucien was once one of their best, but he broke the first law. He fell in love with a subject, a woman he was meant to erase. They both vanished after that, until one day you appeared and everything began again. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. "You're lying. You're trying to turn me against him." But Etienne didn't argue. Instead, he took something from his pocket, a small silver key with a delicate symbol carved into it, a circle broken by a single line. She'd seen that mark before, stamped into the corner of her contract. "This is the only way to see the truth," he said. "There's a vault beneath the agency's old archives. In the city, Lucien kept something there. Files, recordings, proof of what happened to her." "To who?" He hesitated again. "To the woman who came before you." The storm outside broke open, thunder roaring so loud it seemed to rattle the bones of the house. And in that instant, Elena felt it, the faintest flicker of memory, not her own. A flash of a woman's hand signing a name, the same pen, the same rain. When she blinked, Etienne was already moving toward the door. "If you want to know who you really are," he said, "you'll come with me." She didn't follow immediately. She stood for a long moment in the silence that came after he left, her hand pressed against the glass, staring at the dark curve of the sea. Somewhere beneath that surface, she felt the pull of something ancient and inevitable. By dawn, she made her choice. The train to Merveille cut through the landscape like a scar, gray hills, empty fields, and the faint silhouette of the city rising ahead. The closer they got, the stronger her memories became, fragments flickering behind her eyes like film reels burning through. Her father's study, Lucien's voice saying, "You'll be safe now," and the sound of music, her music playing in a place she didn't remember being. They arrived at dusk. Merveille hadn't changed. It was still a city of smoke and marble, where rain fell like secrets and the air smelled faintly of ink and fear. Etienne led her through narrow alleys to an abandoned theater, its name half erased by time. Beneath it, hidden behind a rusted door, was the vault. It took the key in both their strength to open it. Inside, the air was cold, sterile, lined with rows of glass cases and metal cabinets. A faint hum filled the silence, the sound of machines still alive, though forgotten. Etienne moved carefully, his flashlight sweeping over labels. Subject 0 for 1 memory transfer incomplete. Subject 0 for 2 terminated. Subject 0 for 3 active. Then Elena saw it, a file marked Subject 0 for 3, Elise Moreau. Her own name. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were photographs, her face, her voice transcribed, even the contract she'd signed that night. But at the bottom was another page, torn and yellowed, with a different name. Subject 042, Amélie Laurent. She turned to Etienne. Who is this? He swallowed hard. Lucien's first mistake. Elena traced the letters of the name with trembling fingers. Amélie, it felt familiar, like something her mind had been trying to reach for in the dark. She was a pianist too, Etienne said. Brilliant, just like you. The agency promised to protect her from a powerful patron who wanted to control her. But when she tried to run, they made her disappear. Lucien helped her, then vanished. They said she drowned herself in the sea. Elena felt her breath catch. But you think she didn't? He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. I think she became you. Silence hung between them like a held breath. Elena stared at the documents again, her mind spinning. The dates overlapped, the addresses matched. Even the signature of the way the letters curled was the same. Her reflection in the glass door flickered again, shifting, blurring, until for a heartbeat she saw another woman's eyes staring back, softer, sadder. The same face, but not hers. Elise, Etienne said carefully, stepping closer. You weren't meant to remember any of this. That's why Lucien hid you. He wanted to give you another life, a second chance. But they'll come for you now. Both of us. Before she could speak, a faint hum filled the air. Lights flickered on across the vault, one by one, like eyes opening in the dark. They already have, Lucien's voice echoed from behind them. He stepped out of the shadows, the same black coat, the same calm eyes, but there was something hollow in his face now. Something that belonged to a man who had already lost too much. Etienne moved instinctively between them, but Lucien didn't raise his hand. You shouldn't have brought her here, he said quietly. She had a right to know, Etienne snapped. Lucien's gaze shifted to Elena. Knowing doesn't set you free. It only binds you tighter. Elena felt the words land like stones. You lied to me, she said. He shook his head. I saved you. You were dying, Elena. The agency was going to erase you completely. I used the last of what I had left to give you another life, to make you someone they couldn't find. Her voice cracked. So you turned me into someone else. Lucien's silence was answer enough. Etienne reached for her arm. We have to go, he said urgently now. But Lucien's tone hardened. If you leave, they'll follow. The only way to end this is to destroy the contract itself. Elena stared at him. Where is it? He looked past her, toward the far wall of the vault in the archive's heart. The original signatures are bound together. Every life they've taken, every name rewritten, it all stems from that book. Burn it, and you burn the agency's hold. Etienne frowned. You think they'll let us get close to it? Lucien gave a faint, tired smile. They already know we're here. There's no going back. The hum of machinery grew louder, merging with the rhythm of Elena's heartbeat. Somewhere above, footsteps echoed multiple, steady, closing in. Lucien moved to the control panel. There's a passage under the east wing. Go. I'll hold them off. No, Elena said. You said this binds us both. I'm ending it with you. He looked at her for a long time, something like sorrow flickering in his eyes. Then remember one thing, he said softly. Whatever happens, you are more than what they made you. The next moments unfolded like a fever dream. The alarms played, red lights spilled through the corridors as doors burst open. Figures in dark coats swept in, agents silent and efficient. Etienne grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her through the maze of tunnels while Lucien stayed behind, the sound of struggle echoing down the corridor. They emerged into a chamber lined with shelves, and there it was, a single pedestal in the center of the room, holding a massive ledger bound in black leather. The book pulsed faintly, like something alive. The scent of burnt ink filled the air. Elena approached it slowly. On the open page, hundreds of signatures glimmered faintly under the red light. Near the bottom, hers, and just above it, Amélie Laurent. She reached out, fingertips trembling, when Etienne caught her wrist. If you do this, you'll lose everything, he said. Every memory, every piece of who you are now. Then who am I? She asked. The question hung there, fragile and enormous. She looked at her reflection in the polished surface of the ledger, a face made of two histories, two names, one running from the past, the other chasing it. Then she pulled free from his grip. Maybe it's time to stop running. She tore the page. The sound was like thunder splitting the sky. The lights flickered violently, the room trembling as if the entire vault were collapsing inward. Etienne shouted her name, but his voice dissolved in the roar of the wind that seemed to rise from nowhere. The pages of the ledger caught fire slowly at first, then all at once, curling into ash as the red glow consumed them. Elena fell to her knees, her mind filled with images, her father's smile, Lucien's eyes, Amelia's music, the echo of a promise whispered in the dark, and then, silence. When she opened her eyes, the vault was gone. She was standing on the shoreline at dawn, the sea calm once more. The villa loomed behind her, untouched, no sign of fire, no sign of the city, only the faint impression of footsteps leading away toward the cliffs. In her hand, she still held the pen. The ink on its tip shimmered faintly, though she hadn't written a word. A wave touched her feet, cold and clean. From somewhere beyond the mist, she thought she heard a familiar melody, the soft, aching notes of a piano carried by the wind. For the first time, she didn't know if it was coming from the past or the future. And as the morning light broke over the sea, Elena understood one final truth. The contract was gone, but the bond, that inexplicable, impossible thread between love and salvation, remained, and somewhere out there, in the silence between heartbeats, someone else had just picked up the pen. The morning light touched the sea like a hesitant confession. A pale gold shimmer spilled across the horizon, softening the jagged cliffs and the distant ruins of the old town. For a moment, everything seemed impossibly quiet, no echoes of alarms, no voices, no memory of fire. Just the sound of the tide pulling itself closer to the shore, as if to reclaim something it had once lost. Elena stood there barefoot, her dress clinging to her skin, the pen still in her hand. She turned it slowly between her fingers, watching the ink glint in the sunlight. It looked ordinary now, harmless, but the air around her felt charged, as though reality itself hadn't yet decided whether to settle back into place. She took a step toward the water. The cold bit into her ankles, but she didn't move back. Her reflection rippled, her face warping, splitting, returning. It wasn't her own reflection anymore, it was both hers and someone else's, fading in and out like the rhythm of breathing. Immediately the name fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a whisper carried on wind, a single note, then another. A melody she knew too well, one she'd played for years without realizing it wasn't entirely her own. It came from the cliffs to her right, the old lighthouse that hadn't shone in decades. Elena turned. The melody grew stronger, fuller, and unmistakably alive. She followed it, her steps slow at first, then quickening as the tune pulled her forward, threading itself through her thoughts. The closer she got, the more she began to remember not memories exactly, but impressions. A candlelit room, a pair of hands guiding hers across piano keys, a voice saying, "Don't be afraid to play the silence too." Inside the lighthouse, dust floated through a narrow shaft of light like falling ash. The piano sat in the center of the room, impossibly pristine, its black surface gleaming as though it had been waiting for her. And sitting before it, Lucien. He looked unchanged. His coat was dry, his eyes clear, as though the fire and the chaos of the vault had been nothing more than a passing dream. "I told you the sea would return what it took," he said softly, his fingers still resting on the keys. Elena didn't move. "You're dead," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe death is just another contract." Her breath caught. What happened in the vault? Lucien's gaze drifted to the window. "You freed them," he said. "Every soul they ever bound. But the inkwet it took from them had to go somewhere. It found its way back into the one who broke the seal." She frowned. "Me," he nodded. "You carry all of them now, fragments of every life that was written away. Their memories, their emotions. That's why the world feels heavier." The word sank deep, too deep to find the bottom. Elena looked down at her hands, half expecting to see the ink bleeding through her skin. "And you, what are you now?" Lucien smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. The echo of a man who loved too deeply to let the past rest. She wanted to hate him, to scream, to ask why he had turned her into a ghost of another woman. But standing there, surrounded by the faint scent of sea salt and smoke, she realized he was as bound as she had been. Every choice he'd made was stitched with desperation. Still, the question burned. Am I even real? He looked at her then, really looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "You're more real than any of us ever were. You're the sum of everything they tried to erase." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they terrified her. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The piano gave a soft, accidental note, as though struck by unseen fingers. Lucien stood and moved toward her. "There's something you need to see," he said. He led her down a narrow staircase that spiraled deep beneath the lighthouse. The air grew colder, denser. The walls seemed to hum faintly, as if carrying the echo of every step. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber carved from stone. A pool of still water sat in its center, black and mirror smooth. Around it, hundreds of candles burned without flickering. "This is where they buried what remained of the first contracts," Lucien said. "The originals, the ones written before the agency, had a name." Elena's gaze fixed on the pool. It wasn't just reflecting light, it was reflecting memories, faces, moments. She saw herself sitting at the piano, then Amelie, then a dozen other women, each with the same sorrow in their eyes, each one lifting a pen, signing. "Why show me this?" she whispered. "Because it's not over," he said. "The agency wasn't destroyed, it was only silenced. And now that the contracts are gone, they'll come for the ink." The meaning hit her slowly. "Me," Lucien nodded. "You're the last link, the living ledger." A chill passed through her, but with it came something else, a pulse, faint but familiar, beneath her skin. The ink, alive, whispering. She could feel it now, moving like a tide inside her. Every note she'd ever played, every dream, every fragment of someone else's life, it was all there. Her voice trembled. "If they find me, what happens? They'll rewrite you again," Lucian said. "And this time there won't be anything left to recover." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the sea somewhere far above. Elena turned to him. "Then, I have to finish it completely." Lucian hesitated. "To end it, you'd have to go back to where it began. The agency." He shook his head. Further, he pointed to the pool. The surface began to ripple, revealing a vision: a grand ballroom filled with light and masked faces. A man signing a contract in blood-red ink, the same symbol carved into a gold seal. "The first contract," Lucian said. "It began here, centuries ago. A promise between creation and control, between love and ownership." The image faded, replaced by a single phrase etched across the surface. "All that is written must be felt again." Lucian stepped back, his expression unreadable. "If you follow this, there's no coming back the same." Elena met his gaze. "I'm already not the same." She stepped into the pool. The cold hit her like a memory she didn't want to keep, sharp, endless. The water rose to her chest, then her throat, until she was submerged entirely. The last thing she saw was Lucian's face disappearing behind the surface, and then silence. Darkness unfolded around her, heavy and absolute. For a moment, she thought she was drowning. Then light broke through a dim, flickering glow. She was standing in a ballroom just like the one she'd seen in the vision. Music played softly in the background, the sound of strings echoing through marble arches. Guests moved like ghosts, their faces hidden behind ornate masks. At the center of the room stood a man in a white suit. He turned toward her, smiling, and she froze. But not Etienne, as she knew him. His eyes were colder, sharper, his voice smooth as glass. "You found it," he said. "I wondered how long it would take." "What is this?" she asked. He stepped closer, the candlelight glinting off the edges of his mask. "The beginning," he said, "and the end. You see, I wasn't lying when I said I loved you. I just didn't tell you why." Her pulse thundered in her ears. He circled her slowly, his presence electric. "I was the first to sign Elena, the one who made the deal to preserve creation itself. I built the agency. Every contract since has been written in my shadow." She stumbled back. "No, that's not possible." "Oh, but it is," he said softly. "Lucian tried to undo what I built. He thought love could free you from the ink, but love only deepens the writing. That's why it always finds you again." Elena's chest tightened. "You used me. I gave you purpose," Etienne said. "You were meant to carry what I could no longer bear. The memories, the lives, the weight of creation." The air grew heavier, shimmering like heat. The masked guests turned their heads in unison toward her, their faces pale and formless beneath the masks. Whispers rippled through the room, hundreds of voices murmuring her name. The chandelier above flickered violently. She felt the ink surge within her, burning now, demanding to be released. Etienne's voice dropped to a whisper. "You can't fight it, Elena. You are the ink now. You are the story." The music shattered into silence. Every candle went out, and in that breathless darkness, she heard Lucien's voice again, faint but certain. "He doesn't own your story. You do." The world around her began to collapse, walls folding inward, light bending and breaking. Etienne reached for her, his hand catching her wrist. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were desperate. "You can't erase me," he said. "I am what you are." She met his gaze, the ink inside her pulsing like a heartbeat. "Then you'll feel what I feel," and she'll let go. The explosion of light was silent, blinding, pure. When it cleared, she was standing alone again. No ballroom, no masks, no Etienne. Just the endless sea, calm under the rising sun. Her hands were clean. The pen was gone. But somewhere deep in her chest, something still moved. Not darkness, not ink, music, a quiet, unfinished melody. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if it belonged to her or to the world that had written her into existence. The horizon shimmered, and a faint shadow appeared at the edge of the light. Someone walking toward her across the water. Not Lucian, not Etienne. Someone new. Someone who knew her name before she'd ever spoken it. And as the wind carried that familiar piano theme through the air once more, Elena realized the story she thought she had ended was only beginning to write itself again. The shadow moved across the water with an almost impossible grace, a silhouette that seemed to float just above the surface, gliding toward her as the first warmth of the sun spilled across the horizon. Elena's chest tightened, her bare feet sank slightly into the wet sand as she squinted against the glare, trying to discern whether the figure was friend or threat. Her heartbeat had a rhythm now she had never known before, cadence stitched together from her own fears and fragments of countless others who had been written into the contracts. She could feel them inside her, echoing faintly, like whispers under the tide. She had thought the ledger's destruction had ended it all, but now, staring at the figure across the shimmering water, she realized she had only set the storm in motion. The figure stopped a few meters from the shore. The sunlight hit him full in the face, and for the first time, Elena could see his features clearly, sharp, deliberate, unsettlingly familiar. Yet, somehow, he was different from anyone she had known. He carried an aura of quiet command, a calm that didn't belong to this world. "You're here," he said simply, voice carrying across the sea like a stone skipping over still water. Who are you? Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile ghosting his lips. I am the one who wrote what came before you, the one who binds the ink that flows through you. And now, it wants to speak. Elena's stomach dropped. The ink, it pulsed inside her again, faintly at first, then stronger, like a heartbeat she couldn't quiet. Her hands pressed against her chest, feeling it coil and twist. She realized with a pang of fear that the ledger hadn't merely contained lives, it had created them, and now its echoes were demanding a reckoning. You can't stop it, the man said, stepping closer. Each movement seemed to bend the air around him, distorting reality slightly, as if the world itself deferred to his presence. It has already begun. You've carried it too far to turn back. Elena shook her head. I destroyed the contracts. I freed them. He laughed softly, a sound that was both cruel and beautiful, like glass shattering underwater. Freed? No, you freed nothing. You redistributed it. The ink is alive, and it remembers. Every life, every sorrow, every betrayal is now part of you, and they are awake. The words hit her like waves. She stumbled back, her bare toes scraping the sand. The wind picked up, whipping her hair across her face, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something metallic she couldn't place. She turned instinctively toward the horizon and froze. Figures emerged from the sea, not walking, not floating, but appearing, materializing in the mist that rolled in with the tide. At first there were only a few, shadowed shapes with indistinct faces. But as she watched, her chest tightening with growing panic, the figures multiplied. Hundreds, maybe thousands, each one a fragment of a life once bound by ink, all converging silently toward the shore. Her pulse raced. She pressed her hands against her ears, trying to shut out the whispers that had begun to rise with the tide, overlapping, layering. Help me, remember me. We are here. The man stepped forward, closer to her, his eyes scanning the growing crowd. You have to listen, he said. The ink is not just memory, it is judgment. You will be its voice, and soon, its hand. Elena's breath caught. Its hand. What does that mean? You have already begun to write, he said quietly, almost kindly, and now it seeks the conclusion. You can choose to embrace it, or it will choose for you. The realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. Every choice she had made since signing that first contract, every step toward freedom, every act of defiance had been feeding the ink, shaping it, giving it power. And now, standing on the edge of the water, she felt its weight fully for the first time. It demanded not just acknowledgement but action. Her knees buckled slightly and she sank to the sand, staring at the figures advancing silently, their faces still blurred, their voices weaving into a single, pressing hum that vibrated through her bones. I don't understand, she whispered. I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to live. The man crouched down to her level, his face now inches from hers. None of them asked, he said, voice low, resonant, dangerous. But the ink never asks. It demands. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself, to separate herself from the swell of memories and voices inside her. But each pulse, each beat of her heart, echoed with the lives she carried. Amelia's sorrow, Lucien's longing, the countless unnamed voices all threading into one impossible tapestry. Then, suddenly, one face broke through the blur. Etienne. He was there, among the emerging forms, but not as she had known him. His expression was twisted with intent, eyes reflecting a cold clarity that chilled her. And then she noticed it, the same symbol from the ledger, glowing faintly on his wrist, on the skin of the living ledger he had once helped her destroy. Elena, he said, voice clear now, carrying across the waves. You can't do this. You don't know what you've unleashed. She felt a tremor run through her body. His presence seemed to tug at the ink inside her, as though some unbroken connection between them, formed long before, had anchored part of the storm. The voices surged louder, overlapping in a crescendo that threatened to drown her senses. The man beside her placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. Do you feel it? He asked. The moment before the storm breaks. That's what choice looks like. Elena's eyes flew open. The waves had grown taller, curling like glass over shadows, reflecting thousands of distorted faces in the water's surface. The mist thickened, and with it came a suffocating pressure, as if reality itself were bending, waiting for her decision. I don't know if I can, she started, but her voice was cut off by a sudden high-pitched crack. The sky split above her, clouds swirling violently, funneling wind and rain into a vortex over the ocean. The figures in the water surged forward, breaking the boundary between sea and shore. Their movements faster now, urgent, hungry. Elena felt herself lifted by the surge, not by her own feet, but by the pull of the ink inside her, reaching outward, almost alive. It was both terrifying and intoxicating. Every pulse of her heart sent ripples through the crowd of spectral forms. Every thought, every doubt, every desire was amplified, binding the mist, the tide, and the storm to her. The man straightened, eyes narrowing at Etienne. He has always been the tether, he said. The one who believes he can control it. Etienne's gaze didn't waver. And you'll use her as you always have. No, the man said softly, almost regretfully. I will not. She will decide, or the ink will decide without her. That is the law. Elena's chest heaved, the wind tearing at her hair and clothing. She glanced down at the sand, and for a fleeting moment, the shore seemed to stretch impossibly long, a corridor leading towards some unknowable destination. The water hissed and roared at its edges, the figures pressing closer, their voices now a chorus of thousands. We are you are us, you cannot stop what begins. And then, in the midst of the storm, she saw movement that made her blood run cold. One of the figures separated from the tide and stepped onto the shore. Tall, slender, glowing faintly under the storm clouds. Not Etienne, not Lucien, not anyone she had expected. Amélie, or what had been Amélie. Her face was pale, eyes bright with an unnatural intensity, lips curved in a small, knowing smile. She didn't speak, but the air seemed to thrum with her presence, a silent command that reverberated in Elena's chest. The realization struck her like lightning. She wasn't just facing the consequences of the ink. She was facing its origin, its will made flesh. And if Amélie could stand there, so could every fragment the ink had ever consumed. Elena's fingers clenched into fists. The pen, she thought, lost the symbol of choice, of creation, suddenly materialized in her hand, weightless but unbearably present. The ink pulsed beneath her skin as if recognizing it, whispering its demand. Write, decide, act. She looked at the approaching figures, the storm raging around them, Etienne frozen across the sand, and the man beside her watching quietly. Her chest heaved. Every life she carried surged inside her, a torrent of fear, hope, grief, and love, demanding a reckoning. The wind lifted the pen slightly, as if urging her forward. Her gaze flicked to Amélie, then to the figures pressing from the tide, then to Etienne, whose wrist still bore the symbol of the first contract. The choice was hers, and for the first time Elena realized the storm would not wait for hesitation. The ink had chosen to speak through her. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of 1,000 lifetimes pressing against her ribs. The world held its breath, and then the pen lifted. The first word began to form, and with it, the tide, the mist, the storm, and the echoing voices all surged forward, as if the universe itself had paused only to watch what she would write next. The pen hovered in her hand, trembling as the storm around her reached a crescendo. The ink pulsed, a living heartbeat beneath her skin, demanding release. Waves crashed, wind roared, and the figures on the shore, the remnants of countless lives once bound by the agency, pressing closer, waiting. The tide of their presence threatened to overwhelm her senses. Elena's vision blurred. The faces weren't just spirits, they were fragments of her own soul, mirrors of every choice, every memory, every fear and love she had ever carried. Amélie stepped forward again, calm, radiant, a living embodiment of what the ink had once consumed. Her eyes were steady, knowing, and Elena realized with a jolt, Amélie wasn't an enemy. She was the origin, the first voice of the ledger, the first spark that had given birth to every contract that had followed. Elena, Amélie said, voice soft yet penetrating, echoing in her mind as much as through the storm. You've carried us all this time, you've carried me, and now it's time to understand. The ink inside her throbbed violently, whispering fragments of memory in a torrent she could barely process. Names, faces, melodies, every life once written, every sorrow, every love flowed through her in waves of color and sound. She staggered, the pen nearly slipping from her grasp. Etienne's voice broke through the chaos, sharp, commanding, do not let it control you. You are not just the ink, you are the one who decides. Elena blinked rapidly, trying to focus, trying to separate herself from the swarm of existence clamoring inside her. But the truth was unbearable. She felt the ledger's full weight, the contracts not as documents, but as living threads, pulling at her bones, insisting on completion. She realized then that the ink had never been a tool, never just a record, it had been a mirror, and now it demanded her to face herself fully. Lucien appeared behind her in a sudden flash, the same black coat, the same steady presence she had trusted and feared. You have to see it clearly, he said, hand brushing her shoulder. You are the ledger now. Every choice you make will echo beyond this moment, beyond the storm. The words cut deep, but clarity arrived in their sharpness. Elena lifted her gaze. She looked at Amélie, she looked at the figures advancing from the sea. She looked at Etienne and Lucien, both embodiments of paths she might have taken, of choices she had made and avoided, and she understood. This was not about control, not about punishment, not about survival, it was about truth. The pen's tip kissed the wet sand and she began to write. At first it was simple, one word, a declaration. I. The ink glowed silver in the storm's light, spreading outward in ribbons across the sand. The tide recoiled slightly, as though uncertain, and the figures paused, waiting. She wrote again. Remember. With each word, the ink flowed through her, binding her voice with the echoes of Amélie, of herself, of every lost life. Each fragment of memory that had once threatened to consume her now lent clarity, lent weight to her intent. The storm responded, the wind shifted, the waves rose higher, then receded. The figures on the shore, her ancestors in ink, her predecessors, her echoes, leaned in closer, not as adversaries but as witnesses. They had waited, she realized, not for her destruction, but for her choice. She paused, The pen hovered above the sand. She could feel the power thrumming in her veins, the ink alive and impatient. And then the memory she had resisted came the first night she had signed. The envelope, the car, the pen trembling in her hand. The fear, the hope, the longing for escape. And now, standing on this shore, she understood fully. Everything had been both ending and beginning, always leading to this point. Amelie stepped closer, and Elena saw a truth she had not expected. Her own reflection flickered in Amelie's eyes, not just herself, but the woman who had first been consumed by the ink, the first life she had inherited. "We are one," Amelie said softly, her voice merging with the whispers in Elena's mind. "And together, we are whole." The realization hit her with an almost physical force. The ink was not an enemy. It was her inheritance. Her burden, yes, but also her power. Every fragment, every soul, every melody she carried was part of her, not separate, not alien. And now, finally, she could choose. She wrote again, words flowing with more certainty, more intent. Release. The effect was instantaneous. The figures wavered. The mist that clung to the water lifted slightly. The wind softened, and the ink pulsed, brightening, surging outward in a wave that licked at the sea and cliffs, then pulled back. A hum rose from the sand, deep and resonant, vibrating through her chest. The voices inside her spoke together, not in fear or accusation, but in relief, in recognition. Lucien's eyes filled with awe and something else, pride maybe, or hope. Etienne's gaze was tense, watchful, unsure whether this act would break her or bind her further. But Elena did not hesitate. She continued, each word shaping not just the ink, but the lives entwined within it. "We are here, we remember, we are free." The pen moved faster now, guided by instinct, by memory, by emotion. Her hands ached, her heart pounded, but she could feel the release growing, a crescendo sweeping through the storm. The figures on the shore began to dissolve, not vanish, but transform. Their forms softened, becoming part of the sea, part of the wind, part of the light breaking over the horizon. Every soul that had once been bound, every life written and rewritten began to flow outward, unshackled. Amelie smiled, radiant and ethereal. "It is done," she whispered, and Elena felt it too. The ledger's demand had been met. The contracts no longer sought control. The ink had been tempered, reshaped, returned to the flow of life itself. The storm broke, rain softened into mist, waves settled. The sun rose fully, golden and unshakable, spilling light across a world that felt newly alive. The pen in Elena's hand dimmed, the glow fading to ordinary silver. She lowered it slowly, staring at the sand where her words had burned into existence, now washed smooth by the tide. She sank to her knees, exhausted. Every muscle screamed, every heartbeat threatened to shatter. But there was relief here too, a profound, elemental calm. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, she breathed without the weight of history pressing on her chest. Lucien stepped beside her silently. He didn't speak, he simply offered a hand, and she took it. Their fingers intertwined, and for a long moment, there was no ink, no storm, no shadow of the agency, only the two of them, standing at the edge of a world that had almost drowned them in its secrets. Etienne remained on the shore, distant but not threatening, his expression unreadable. He did not approach. Perhaps he understood now that this moment was not his to claim. The ledger had been silenced, and with it, the power he had once held dissipated into the dawn. Elena rose slowly, feeling the sand beneath her feet, feeling the wind on her skin, tasting the salt of the sea. She glanced over the water. There was no sign of the figures, no trace of the storm, only the endless calm horizon, stretching into possibilities she could not yet comprehend. The pen lay on the sand, inert now, a tool no longer of command but of memory. She bent down, picked it up, and for the first time, held it without fear. She had not erased the past, nor had she dominated it. She had acknowledged it, honored it, and in doing so, claimed it not as a burden, but as a part of herself. Amelia's presence lingered faintly, a shimmer at the edge of her vision. Elena realized that she would always feel the echoes of what had come before. That was the nature of the ink. But it would no longer speak without her consent. Lucien's voice broke the quiet, soft but filled with meaning. "It's over." Elena shook her head slightly, smiling through exhaustion. "No," she said, "it's beginning." The tide lapped gently at her feet. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the cliffs, the villa, the ruins, the world itself. And somewhere, faint and insistent, a melody began to rise, carried on the wind. The piano, the first note of the story she would continue to write with her own hands. She looked at Lucien again, at the vast.com sea, at the horizon still unbroken. For the first time, she felt the future not as a threat, but as a canvas. And in that moment, Elena knew the storm had passed, but its memory, its music, would guide her every step forward. The figures, the ink, the contracts, they were gone. Yet the story was hers now. All of it, every note, every life, every choice. She inhaled the air deeply, filling herself with the scent of the sea, the warmth of sunlight, and the quiet promise of possibility. And then she began to walk toward the horizon, the pen still in her hand, ready to write what came next. The sun had risen fully, spilling gold and amber across the cliffs and the quiet shore. The sea shimmered like glass, every ripple catching the light as though it were 1,000 tiny mirrors reflecting the sky. Elena walked slowly along the sand, the pen still in her hand, but now it felt like an old friend rather than a weapon or a tether. Each step pressed her footprints into the wet sand, ephemeral yet deliberate, a testament that she had been here, that she had chosen, that she had survived. She stopped at the water's edge and let the tide wash over her feet, cool and steady, pulling softly at the sand beneath her. The memory of the storm, of the ink, of the living ledger, all of it felt both distant and intimate at once. It was as if the world itself had exhaled, and she could feel that exhalation settling into her bones. Lucien stood a few paces behind, silent, watching. There was a calmness to him now, a weight lifted that neither of them had expected. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say. Words had carried them this far, had bound them and unbound them, but now silence was enough. The storm had passed, and it had revealed truths too large for language. Elena knelt for a moment, touching the wet sand, letting the grains sift through her fingers. She thought of Amelia and the lives bound to the ink, each one a thread in a tapestry she had carried unknowingly. They had demanded her voice, her choice, and she had given it freely, not as control over them, but as acknowledgement. Each life had found its release, and with that release, she had gained something else: perspective, depth, a sense of the immeasurable interconnectedness of existence. The wind shifted gently, carrying with it the faintest trace of a melody. It was hers, yet not hers. Notes she had played, notes Amelia had played, all of them blending into something new and singular. The music rose and fell with the breeze, carrying the past into the present, a quiet affirmation that life, in all its fragility and beauty, continued to unfold. Lucien approached her slowly, the distance between them closing without haste. When he reached her, he did not take her hand. Instead, he stood beside her, two figures facing the horizon. Two people who had seen the weight of infinity pressing down and had chosen to endure it together. "Elena," he said finally, voice low, threaded with awe and quiet reverence, "you've carried everything, and still you stand. You've seen the ledger, felt the ink, and yet, you are yourself, not them, not the ledger, you." She smiled faintly, the gesture carrying the exhaustion of countless nights and the relief of countless days. "I don't know if I would have believed it before," she admitted. "That I could be myself, even after everything." Lucien's gaze shifted toward the sea. "Perhaps that's the lesson the ink wanted you to learn. That identity, true identity, is not defined by what others bind to you. It is defined by what you choose to carry and what you choose to release." She looked at the horizon, the vast expanse of sky meeting water in a line so thin it seemed fragile yet unbreakable. For a long moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel the world as it was, limitless, unpredictable, and breathtaking in its ordinariness. The pen in her hand caught the sunlight. She traced a circle in the air, absent-mindedly, as though testing the space between thought and action. She realized it no longer carried the weight of obligation, no longer pulsed with demand. It was hers to use, if she ever wished. And yet, for the first time, she did not feel the need to write, to act, to control. The storm had taught her that some things were not meant to be forced, only understood. A seagull cried overhead, cutting through the quiet, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she laughed softly, a sound that startled even her. The laughter was not frivolous. It was acknowledgement. It was the weight of survival meeting the joy of existence. It was being fully present in a moment that had been earned. "Do you think it will return?" she asked, voice almost lost to the breeze. Lucien shook his head gently. "The ink, no, not like before. It doesn't demand any more. It waits, like memory, like history, present but patient. And you've changed it. You've changed yourself." Her gaze returned to the horizon. The waves lapped at her ankles, retreating in gentle rhythm. She thought of the first night she had signed the contract, of the fear and urgency that had driven her to flee, of the promise of safety and the tangled road that promise had led her down. It had seemed then that danger defined her. Now she understood it was her choices, her courage, her willingness to feel, to endure, to accept responsibility, not the contract that had defined her. She looked at Lucien. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do now?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both relief and lingering sorrow. "I will follow the music. I will see where it leads. Perhaps it will teach me something I have forgotten." Elena nodded. They stood in companionable silence, two survivors of something larger than themselves, witnessing the calm after a storm that had reshaped them both. The world stretched around them, vast, endless, and impossibly beautiful in its imperfection. For a long moment, she let herself imagine what life might be like from this point forward. No contracts, no ink, no shadows pressing from the edges of memory. Just the ordinary and extraordinary mingling, sunlight on water, wind in hair, the quiet insistence of existence. The seagulls wheeled overhead. A sail appeared far out on the horizon, small and white, drifting across the ocean. It was ordinary, but it was also proof. The world kept moving, even after the ledger, even after the storm. Life found its way. Elena pressed the pen against her palm one last time, letting it rest there without thought, without demand. She did not need to write to shape the world. She She only needed to continue living within it, fully and deliberately, as herself. She stepped closer to the water, letting the tide pull gently at her feet. Every wave was a reminder of impermanence, of the cycles that carried both sorrow and joy, of endings and beginnings interwoven seamlessly. Lucian stayed beside her, quiet, steady, a presence that no longer carried the weight of expectation. He did not speak, but she did not need him to. Words had carried them through storms, but now silence was enough. Elena looked down at the horizon, the place where sea met sky. The world felt fragile, yes, but it was also vast, full of possibility. She felt the echo of Amelie, of the voices that had once pressed against her mind, now as gentle whispers, soft as wind, offering guidance rather than command. She realized that all the stories she had carried, the contracts, the ink, the hidden lives, were not burdens in the end. They were threads of connection, weaving her into a larger tapestry, teaching her empathy, courage, and the meaning of choice. The question rose unbidden in her mind, quiet yet insistent. How much of ourselves do we carry because we must, and how much because we choose to? And another, almost as quietly, as if whispered by the waves themselves, when we free what binds us, what do we leave behind, and what do we take with us? She inhaled deeply, the scent of salt and sunlight filling her lungs. She could hear the faint, lingering melody on the wind, the piano she had played, the music that had traveled through the ink, the lives, the storm, and now through her. She let it fill her, let it settle over her like a promise that life, in all its fragility and unpredictability, could still be beautiful. Her gaze swept the shore. Footprints in the sand stretched behind her, evidence of her journey, evidence of her survival. She knelt briefly, touching the wet grains, then rose again, taller in spirit than before. Lucian shifted slightly, glancing at her. She returned the look with a small, serene smile. Together they turned to face the horizon, the sunlight spilling over them, golden and forgiving. The wind tugged gently at her hair. The pen remained in her hand, quiet, inert. The world before her was uncharted, open, and free. She had been tested, bound, rewritten, and yet she remained herself unbroken, resilient, and alive. She whispered to the horizon, more to herself than anyone else. The story ends, and begins, with me. A gull cried overhead. A sail glided slowly across the water. The tide moved, inexorable, patient, carrying away the remnants of past storms. The melody rose and fell, echoing softly across the cliffs, the sand, the endless sky. Elena took a step forward, another, then another, feeling the water wrap around her ankles, her knees, her feet. She let the world hold her, let its enormity settle around her chest, and in that quiet, infinite space, she understood fully. Freedom was not the absence of past, but the embrace of all that had led her here, the courage to carry it, and the willingness to walk into tomorrow with open eyes. The horizon shimmered, endless, and as she walked, her reflection stretched across the water, clear, unbroken, whole. The pen in her hand caught a final glint of sunlight and then rested, silent, a witness. And as she stepped further into the tide, Elena wondered quietly, profoundly, almost to herself, how many of the stories we carry define us, and how many do we finally choose to write ourselves? The sea whispered in reply, and the wind carried her forward. The world was waiting, and so was she.